All right, welcome folks. Welcome back to Larger, Freer, More Loving. As always, I'm Matt Levine.
I'm Dwight Lewis.
Last time we talked with intersectional indigenous activists Desiree Kane and Dewandin Huita Aldrich about indigenous injustice, land reparations, and U.S. naivete. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Black masculinities. And we'll begin by talking about the Black male experience, particularly in academia, as a means of defining Tommy's man-not and the multiplicitousness of Black masculinities. Following that, we're going to apply this knowledge as a critique of intersectionality with the hopes of propelling intersectionality towards new growth and understanding. And for that conversation today, we've got two scholars that do fantastic research on Black maleness, Tommy Curry and John Youngblood. And we're just going to start off by having them introduce themselves, starting with John and then Tommy.
Okay, I thank you for having me on your show. My name is John Youngblood. I'm associate professor in the English and Communication Department at State University of New York. I have to admit that I am happy to be here, but I don't feel that I'm worthy of being on the same stage with Dr. Tommy Curry. I'll put that out there right now, and I'll be more than happy to explain why that's the case during the process of this interview.
Thanks for being here, Dr. Youngblood. Tommy.
Right.
Well, Dr. Youngblood, that was surprising, and I'm extremely humbled by the compliment. My name is Dr. Tommy Curry. I'm a professor of philosophy. I hold a personal chair in Africana philosophy and Black male studies at the University of Edinburgh. Most widely, I think I'm known for my publication of The Man Not and creating a theoretical paradigm that currently goes under the moniker of Black male studies.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Tommy. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you for the invitation.
So we're going to start out here. John and Tommy, we know that you have experienced difficulties on your campuses with respect to race and race relations. You both have been interviewed about death threats that you have received, but we think some interviews have missed a crucial question. John, we'll begin with you, of course. How does it feel to experience death threats for being a Black man who is willing to speak out about injustice? How does it feel?
To be honest with you, you join a class that you don't try to join. It's a group of people that I didn't seek out to be in that group of people. In fact, I never thought I did anything that would put me in that group. I thought I was just speaking truth to power, maybe somewhat controversial, but at least it's truthful, it's informed what I'm saying. I didn't think that I was walking into those waters of being at risk of receiving death threats, and to receive 3 back to back, where they not just threatened my life, but my partner's life, as well as my kids' life. They knew my house address. That was just surreal. The first moment was like, I'll never forget. It was like I had an out-of-body experience. You see it in the movies, you see it, you read it in stories, but there is literally I'm literally being called the worst names on earth imaginable, with a threat to put a rope around my neck and hang me from a tree. It makes you feel dirty. It makes you feel ashamed. It makes you question what you did, if it was worth what you did. I remember considering putting a rope around my neck when I fell asleep, so that I could at least overcome that fear that I had of me and my children being lynched together. And I literally thought that would be the best way to deal with that fear, was to just sleep with a rope around my neck. And, it was just a lot of mental anguish, a lot of mental health issues. I developed, what's the word that I'm looking for? What is it called? PTSD. And now, because I am a Black male who has been attacked for being a Black male with an informed opinion, and that hasn't stopped, my experiences continue to be so linked to that moment, to where that PTSD never goes away. I never get any release. I now understand that the release that I so desperately desire comes with retirement. If I'm fortunate enough to be one of those few Black male professors, scholars who actually makes it to retirement with my life and my sanity, because a lot of us don't realize just the mental health issues that Black male scholars have to deal with on a day-to-day basis as it is. It's been a challenge. It's been a real challenge, especially since, you know, people are more interested in the sensational part of the death threats rather than the personal parts, you know, just, you know, how are you doing? You know, this is real. These things are taking place. You're witnessing these things to occur around the country. You know, how are you doing? You know, I don't get those types of experiences. You know, people almost refer to the death threats like it's some type of badge of honor. Like, you got these death threats and we've had these death threats and he's gone through these death threats, as if I'm not a whole human being with feelings and emotions and fears and insecurities and all those other things that because I'm a Black male, I don't get to own anyway. And so I feel the same insecurities, but I feel trapped that I can't even really own those insecurities. I can't really get frustrated. I can't get angry about the way it was dealt with because I'm a Black male and I'm so policed all the time that I've yet to really feel that I've been able to express the pain and the hurt and the loss of those death threats.
Yeah, man, that's a lot. My heart hurts just listening to that. Seriously, the idea of having to accept fear by doing a thing to myself is terrifying. Right, the only way that then I can be prepared for the types of fear that I have to carry as a Black man is to go ahead and do it to myself. Let myself already experience it. That is, I'm sorry, I heard that and my heart literally just fell. Because I had some things happen at a previous university that I was at. And I had a Black male professor actually call me and say, hey, how can I help you? And I was already doing the thing that you just said. I said, I actually have to learn this for myself. Like, you can't help me. I need to get used to these type of things happening, right? And I was already allowing myself to accept the fear by allowing people to do that thing to me. And it's like, man, that's like just innate almost. It feels like now I didn't even know it, but it's something that I'm just doing to exist as a Black male, to exist Black. Man. I'm taken back right now. But we're gonna ask Tommy a question too, real fast. Tommy, we know that you've had similar experiences. What I'm gonna ask you to do is actually step a little bit beyond what John was saying, and I want you to talk, if you can, about this loss, about this. So he talked about death threats being an honor, right? What does it mean to actually take on that honor? What do you lose in the process of taking on that honor?
Yeah, it's difficult, you know, because I very much experienced what John was saying. You know, I think that when Black men have this happen to them, a part of you thinks that it's inevitable because people think you deserve it. You know, people celebrate your pain, and I'll be very honest here. You know, a lot of people don't know that I received the death threats by the alt-right about a week or two after I made a complaint about racism to the administration at Texas A&M. So I have no idea or no evidence to say that these things were connected, but in my mind, it's always been suspicious that years of harassment of myself and other Black graduate students, I make a formal complaint, and 2 weeks later, I'm being attacked by the alt-right by a mysterious or anonymous tip-off. And I looked at the people that were dealing with me, you know, white deans, white professors, you know, claiming, oh, you know, this is terrible, but me at the same time seeing a certain delight that they got from it. because despite how well I did, and despite the kind of diversity I brought there, you know, I'll say one administrator once told me that the problem a lot of people had with me in Texas was that I thought too highly of myself. So when these, yeah, I mean, and think about this. This is, you know, this is that environment. So when death threats come, it's a way, especially in the South, to put you in your place, right? And the kind of loss you feel with that is immense. You feel it psychologically and existentially because you don't know. You're in an all white Southern environment where people are very adamant that they don't like Black people, that Black people shouldn't be in departments and on campus. You get it from colleagues. You don't feel safe anywhere in the city because this isn't just a campus phenomenon. This is, if I get stopped by a cop, is this one of the cops that agree with the white supremacists?
Yeah.
You fear for your family, right? I had to pull my 2 little girls out of school. You know, and then I'm in an environment, you know, I'm from the South, so I'm in an environment where any white person at any moment could be deputized to take my life, and people would applaud that person. So that loss is significant. And on the other side of it, you think that you've ruined your career somehow, that because you were doing your work and publishing, and you did a podcast that said Black people have a right to defend themselves, this becomes the basis, right? This becomes the basis of your career being ruined. Not that you said something outlandish, but that a white supremacist with nothing more than a bachelor's degree from LSU somehow gets an audience with a Black professor. And then because this white supremacist disagrees on a blog, my career as a Black man and as the first full professor in philosophy in the institution becomes ruined. So then you know that other white people across the country will use that against you to get a job. And he's a troublemaker. He's unfit. So then, and it doesn't become and that argument doesn't become an argument about, well, what am I going to do professionally? It becomes an argument, well, how do I feed and take care of my family? How do I contribute to my household? How do I find other forms of work? And it becomes, you almost get depressed because the way you experience it is not just as like people are attacking you, you're scared for your life, but you're scared for your family. You know that anything you do is going to be painted in a negative light. You can't protect yourself. You can't protect your family, right? So you're in this world, right? And I remember thinking back when it happened to me that my father used to tell me a story when I was little because, you know, when they interviewed me about the situation, I told them that we had a shotgun in the back of our couch. Like the old couches had, you know, boards in the back of them. And part of the reason was that my dad said that anytime Black people got something in the South, white people felt licensed to come in and take it if they wanted, and that you had to always protect yourself. So I'm educated, got a PhD, teaching at a major research university. And a few years ago, I had to accept, you know, at the age of 36, 37, the very same lessons my daddy taught me when I was 4 or 5. And that's what I mean when I say that you're at a standstill, because the accusation is that as a Black man, you should have known never to offend white people. You should have known that your place in the world, right, is to be subservient. Don't you know, boy, Black people don't have rights? Don't you know? You know, that's what it feels like. So you go to sleep at night thinking, well, what if something happens and you can't stop it? Or if you do stop it, does that mean they carry me off to the electric chair because I was protecting my family? It's an immense form of pressure that results in powerlessness. And I'll be honest with you, I had white people tell me, white people at the university at that time tell me that they think that I started this whole controversy to sell my book. Right? So the idea was notice the effort that, so I'm such a depraved individual that I put the lives of my wife and my 2 daughters on the line to sell a book, because in their mind, they couldn't understand why the book was doing so well. It must be the controversy. This is what Black men go through that nobody wants to talk about. that they're never victims, that their lives don't matter, that they can't defend themselves. That even when someone attacks your life, you still don't have the right to defend yourself. And it's through this fear, intimidation, and violence that the idea is that we're going to keep that boy in his place, because no matter how educated he is, he can never speak against institutions and he can never challenge white people. And that's an unwritten rule in the American Academy and the discipline of philosophy that people refuse to acknowledge, because they know that it's these intimidation tactics and this national imposition of fear that makes us stay silent.
John, I thought you wanted to say something.
Unpack that. I mean, because he's speaking. Yeah.
He's speaking truth. Some of the things that I like grabbed onto in this is how white intellectual arrogance can actually take away control actual intellect or actual knowledge, and how it has the power to just white it out if it wants to. And then also this, what really is at the core of this, is that whiteness has the ability to take blackness whenever it wants. Like, blackness does not have power in the same way that whiteness does in this world. These are things that when you look at them, at least from this perspective, especially when we want to talk about the Black male perspective, and then we also want to talk about intersectionality, or we want to talk about patriarchy. It's hard to then have these ideas of malehood that go along with white patriarchy, when whites can come and take power and protection away from you that you're supposed to be able to have if you are in this patriarchal world, where as a Black male, you've been given particular things, right, in relationship to intersectionality. So as we go along that thread, we want to look and turn a little bit towards Tommy's book in relationship to this.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's interesting there. You talk about the willingness of whiteness to steal everything and to take every bit of power. I mean, we saw this just this past week with this woman, Jessica Krug, who's literally willing to steal blackness on top of it, right? I mean, so this is just nonstop. But yeah, no. So Tommy, you brought up your book here and the responses to it. So we want to talk about that a little bit. So in your book, The Man Not, you define Black men as men not. So we wanted you, like John said, to please unpack that a little bit. What does it mean to be a man?
Absolutely. Well, I'll give you a really clear example. When I received these death threats, not only did people say they were going to kill me and my monkey families, they talked about lynching me and cutting off my genitalia. They talked about, one person talked about raping me, and the other person called me a rapist. Now, they said I Bill Cosby them, a white woman. And the man not is this contradiction of sexual terms, right? Black men have never been defined as men. And I'm not saying that in terms of rhetoric. I'm saying that in terms of the science from the 1860s forward. In every stage that Black men were engaging with the questions of freedom or politics, they were as defined as something other than men. Savages, beasts, rapists. In the 1950s, they were called effeminate. In the 1960s and 70s, they were said that they were apatriarchal because they were raised by their mothers and had female personality disorders. In 1975, Joseph Pleck said, well, the reason that they have because they have female personality disorders, they're sexually confused. They're not actually real men, and they lean towards homosexuality. So in every period of time, Black men has been defined as something other than themselves. And the man not is trying to capture that negation. We've been operating in rules that have been given to us by white feminists from the 1860s forward. The ideas of patriarchy we have today are defined by white women reading Black Power movies. So when you read Shulamith Firestone, Dialectics of Sex, and she tells you that black men are patriarchs, that's when that argument is being introduced. In the second assault, when they're saying that we're rapists because we're not real men, notice the argument. All the arguments coming from the 60s, 70s, and 80s say that black men are rapists because they're not real men. And because they're not real men, they imitate the only thing they can capture from white men, which is rape. So everything well into the late 20th century has been defined purely by our savagery and purely by the idea that we have the natural born potential propensity for more violence than white people. And then we come back today and we settle on a gender theory that gives us anecdotes and the lack of citation to define who we are. So we have no problem citing through personal experience or the story that one black person or white person had with a black man that shows that they're patriarchal, violent, and dangerous. But black men don't get to investigate themselves as subjects of study. So the man not is trying to capture that fundamental vacuity that's constantly imposed upon us, that's filled in by other people's fear and perceptions of it. And that's the work that I'm trying to do, to show people that if you have to hold these mythologies up to the day of light, that they suddenly disappear. The minute you say the black men are sexist, say, well, let's go look at black men's attitudes. What? They're more progressive or just as progressive as black women. Oh, let's look at their implicit bias. Black men in both political spectrums, Democratic and Republican, have less implicit bias towards groups than any other group. So how is it possible that the evidence continues to signal to the world that black men are not only some of the most disadvantaged beings in the United States and across the globe, but also one of the most humane and caring altruistic groups of people through all of history, but we're defined by the perceptions that other people have of us. And the man not is asserting that. Black men are not trying to imitate. They're not mimetic. They're not trying to be white men. That is a poisonous lie that was started purely on the basis that they saw black men as rapists. So the idea that we still study black men in this way in the 21st century, when these are some of the decadent theories coming out of subculture violence theory in the mid-20th century, tells you not only that there's no compassion for the humanity of black people, but there's a fundamental dishonesty in the way that we construct them so that other people can make careers and get jobs. So the man not is a deconstructive and demystifying concept that is trying to get the world not to make excuses and apologetics for black men, but to genuinely engage in the study of black men. And this is an endeavor that all black men should take up, because we can't continue to say that we invest in a progressive politics when the fundamental idea behind liberalism is that we leave black men and the nigger down in the ghetto. We can't keep saying that black people are progressing when black men are being left to rot in jails and being cast as an undercast in the systems of America that doomed them to lives of crime, invisibility, and disposability.
Wow. All right. Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
So I would not want to have to be the person to follow that up. So John, I know you are a perfect person to follow that up. I want to bring your expertise in here. So you both are a black man and serve as a source of support, guidance, and wisdom for dozens and dozens, hundreds of black men on our campus. So how does that experience you have there connect up with what Tommy said about the man not here?
Okay, one of the most proud moments I've ever had is to be in a conversation with Dr. Tommy Curry, the author of Man Not. What can I add? What can I even add to the black male experience? He just articulated it so wonderfully well, so brilliantly well. I mean, honestly, my black male students, for whom I am their main person they come to, and so here they get to watch me being neutered on a daily basis. They get to watch me being marginalized on a daily basis. They see that they are the ones that I fight for the hardest, that I'm willing to put my career at risk for them, and they appreciate it. They show me love for that, but they also see me getting just knocked down, dismissed, relegated to the side, marginalized, as they even say have claimed to shadow banned. They see how I'm treated for having a strong voice on their behalf, and so then they question why even try to have a voice? Why not even go there? Why, Dr. Youngblood, should I even try to do this, what you're suggesting I do? We see how you're being treated. We see how every single time you try to do something, you get knocked down. So, and then we start finding out that, like when I was growing up, when I was a young man in college, just going to college, in high school and college, I learned to not walk next to a white woman, especially on the sidewalk. So if a white woman was walking on the sidewalk, I learned to walk either off the sidewalk, but preferably to go across the street, because she would feel a lot safer with me across the street than with me walking next to her. My students do the same thing. My students talk about hugging the hallway so that they can't be seen as being aggressive or intimidating or even flirtatious, you know? And so they talk about this experience of being almost neutered, that you have to, in order to exist, you have to have a neutered identity. You certainly can't be a male, a man with testosterone, with all the chemistry and all of the responses of a testosterone-driven individual. You have to somehow take that chemistry that is naturally just doing what it does and force yourself to contain that chemical reaction, those chemical responses. And so they're not free, we're not free to express themselves. And they're trying to figure out, how in the world do I have a voice? And so we struggle with trying to understand, why are more and more Black males dropping out of school? Why are more and more Black males not graduating from school? Why are more and more Black males not going to graduate school? Because they are not blind. They see what's happening. They see what's going on, and they see it doesn't matter. That's literally what they say. It doesn't matter if I get a PhD. It doesn't matter if I get all of these accomplishments, because in this country, in this society, I'm still just going to be a nigga and be dismissed for it and treated as a result of it. Now, the one thing that I will say that's been an interesting experience for Black men that I've witnessed is this. We used to have what I would say Black women support. Right, that Black women were holding us down, that Black women were right there lifting us up. That is something that they don't see. That's something that they don't feel. That's something that's not happening like it used to. So there is a lonely gulf occurring here as well. So that not only are they not allowed to be men in the way that they see their white counterparts being men, not only do they have to make sure that they contort their bodies in a certain way as to not been threatened, but that one group that used to have their back regardless no longer has their back. So that's what I'm noticing among the Black males, that I think actually Tommy's book Man Not kind of addresses all of those issues, all of those experiences. But I have to say, and you can edit this out, but Tommy, listening to you talk is like being in church for me.
Yeah.
It's like watching the lawyer in the courtroom who finally has the attention of the juror and justice is being delivered. It's just listening to you is such an edifying event for me. I have to give you two a great deal of thanks for even allowing me to be here, because I would like to be here just to listen to Tommy more so.
Yeah.
Bro, thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. And I got to tell you, if I can, that means a lot, bro, because you have no idea how much anger and hatred I get for just trying to humanize Black men. You know, the book came out. I wanted to have conversations with people. I was willing to go to forums and debate the issues with the evidence, the facts, and nobody took me up on that. Instead, the book somehow becomes this Bible, I suppose, for every negative thing that Black men are. And that's despite the fact that it's been a worldwide success, in the sense that Black men are reading it all across the world. The idea is that a Black man cannot say anything about his group that other people don't approve. And anybody who's read the book always comes to me and say, this was so eye-opening, that you're talking about Black men who were abused, Black men who've been brutalized, Black men who've been erased, Black men who are thinking about killing themselves. You have no idea how many emails I've gotten from Black men who have had to deal with depression, were suicidal, and victims of rape. And despite all that, despite the book bringing them to a realization that they need help, right? I have these people, black, white, black male, black feminists, etc., telling me that the work is worth it because they don't value black people, black men's lives.
Right.
They don't care how many lives, right? They don't care how many lives that my book has saved, right? They don't care how many people went to get help. Like, I went to see a doctor. I made up with my father. I was thinking about killing myself, but now I know it's not me, it's the environment. I have tons of those emails over the last 3 years. And not a single person that criticizes has ever said that, wow, even if we disagree, these people, these boys, these young men's lives make a difference. And that absolutely disgusts me about the camp. Absolutely disgusts me.
No, so go ahead, John. Go ahead, John. Go
I just think that black men are the greatest actors in the trauma porn that this country has fallen in love with. And so our deaths are going to be much more desired than our lives. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that people aren't celebrating you saving lives and don't recognize you saving lives, and that you're saving people's sanity, literally people's sanity, because they can read that somebody else understands this experience. I'm not alone, so you're actually saving people's. But see, we're caught up in trauma porn, and the greatest actors in trauma porn, and only the lead role for this trauma porn are dead black men. So that's really our value, is to be dead black men. That's really what we are. That's where people feel safest around us, is around our dead bodies. That's when we can actually be respected, is our dead bodies. I mean, look at George Floyd. Oh my goodness, we lifted that brother up. That brother is up there having saved the world. I mean, he is just getting credit for things he never would have been considered getting credit for. Why? Because he's dead.
Martin Luther King's lives. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, we don't. Martin Luther King. We all, Martin Luther King, what a great man. No doubt, not taken away from what he did. But what did he have to do to reach that status? He had to die. Black men and our deaths is all they want. Yeah, that's all that's desired. That's all they've ever had for entertainment. That's the most entertaining thing. There were people that would go to these lynches. They would lynch black men, and they would have picnic dinners all around the tree, and then burn up the body, and then cut up the body and have souvenirs. I mean, the black male body is to be hated, is to be violently treated, and ultimately it is to be killed. And that's one thing I had to understand with my colleagues and everybody, that honestly, what I can do for everybody to finally be accepted and embraced and people comfortable with me, and to say something good about what I have done, I have to die.
Yeah. And I feel that hauntings, that idea haunts me. It really does haunt me, because I know that as much hell as I put up with now, it's not going to be until I die that people will be like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. That's why I wrote the book, The Man Not, about the corpse. Because every time we talk about black men, it's about the corpse. And usually it's somebody else telling the story. So we argue all day about the lives of Du Bois and the lives of, Cleaver and everybody, and no black man is taking that story as their own.
That's right.
Everybody else gets to construct. We read Eldridge Cleaver the way that Michelle Wallace told us to read Eldridge Cleaver. She comes out and says, well, I made up the whole black macho thing. I don't even claim it. It was some white woman wrote it. And people are still like, but that's the best book, right? This book won. So we're literally just characters in someone else's mythology. And the most damning piece about this is that somebody comes in and says, I dare you to study black men. Before you form an opinion, let's just study us, right? There's no ideology. There's no ism. Let's just study what we claim exists about black men, and no one will even engage or defend their position once it's subject to study. So then the argument becomes ideological. We just don't think that black men should be studied. We don't think black men should be hired. We don't think black men should have a voice to talk about themselves. And we don't even do that to white people. White people run around the world committing genocide, right? White people today, our whole movement, our whole black politics is focused on the idea that white men and women have done nothing but inflict violence upon us even to this very day. But they are still listening to white people. They're still seeking white people out for an opinion. They still want to have coalitions with white people because white people have resources. But black men, who are the majority of the men dying in the streets, the boys being assassinated, the people that are denied any sort of futurity, are the ones that are being demonized, because every time they're shot, like, well, that's tragic, but you know, black men are violent. Black men are raped. Right? And that's why I say in the book, every conversation that tries to analyze black men is a they are but conversation.
Mm.
And
So,
so how do you, sorry, go ahead, Dwight.
yeah, so I hear that, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, why is it so difficult, right, for the rest of society to see black men as the man not? Like, what is holding the rest of society back from seeing black men
A great deal
as
of
the man not?
That's been a very great deal of concerted effort in this country, especially through media, especially through newspaper. I mean, that has been going on since days of slavery. I mean, even the minstrel shows played a role in that. But there's a great deal of investment this country has in demonizing black men from the very beginning. That's where much of our sensationalism, when it comes to short stories that were ever written, or newspapers that were ever published, that was the theme, right? Is the scary black man. That's a lot of work that has been gone into demonizing black men. You have to give white men credit for that, because a lot of attention was lifted off of white men because of the fear of the black man. White men who were beating the shit out of their wives. White men who were abusing the shit out of their families. White men who were molesting the crap out of their families, right? They by being able to create this boogeyman, this black man, which they have done very effectively. Look at just throughout history, our entertainment has been at the expense of black people, black people's humanity, black people's experiences, black people's identities. That's what this entertainment in the country is all about. So yeah, that's what we have invested in so heavily in this country, is the criminalization of black men, the demonization of black men. We can't even be sexual unless we're objects of sex. Right? We can't own our own sexuality. All we could be is an objective as sex items, sex objects. You know, in this time where we talk about women are being are sexualized and women are nothing but sex objects, and I'm not disagreeing with that argument, but what about the black male experience? You don't get a chance to poke your chest out. You don't get a chance to own your sexuality. All you can do is be the object of someone's sexual desire. If you dare have a desire, if you have a desire, you can't ever express it. You can't even express it. I was on campus one day and I needed something from someone, and a white woman. And this white woman was outside smoking a cigarette with other white women. And I asked if one of them knew where something was. And one of them looked at my feet and they said, "You got big feet." And I hesitated because I was worried about where this was gonna go. And the next comment was, "Well, you know what they say about men with big feet."
Oh, Lord.
And then I thought, they're really gonna go there. And then the other one said, "Well, he has twins, so you know he must have something."
Oh, Lord, 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 Lord.
Now,
Lord.
this is me at my job. And when I brought it up to officials, it was dismissed.
Absolutely it was.
As unimportant, irrelevant, what's the big deal type of thing. Now, could you imagine, flip that script around and it's the three black men who don't have the same rank as that white woman, I'll leave it there. And she comes out and you got big breasts, right? And you know what they say about women with big breasts? Well, she's got 2 kids, you know, they got to feed her with something. Could you imagine how that would have been viewed? Right? The hypocrisy is just overwhelming when it comes to the black male's experience, the black male's identity, and even when it comes to sex, even when it comes to the basic human function of sex, a black man is not free to express himself. Absolutely. All he can be is an object.
Right. And Tommy, this is something you've worked on a lot, this hypocrisy, this mythology, these misperceptions around black men and sexuality. Could you tell us about some of that work, please?
Man, well, you know, first, you know, John, I mean, that resonates so much. when I was in Texas, there was a white female colleague that would always rub my shoulders, right? She would always literally do this every time she greeted me or I was about to leave. So much so that my wife actually made a comment about it. And we had a discussion where I told her, I was like, yeah, it's really bogus. You know, I'm uncomfortable with it. But I was like, if I say anything about it, I'm gonna be accused of being the aggressor. Right. So if I don't like this white woman touching me, other people, we had a gentleman come in, a black man come in for an interview. And this tells you how, and we went to a restaurant and he saw it. And he asked me, well, what's up with that? And I explained the situation to him. And he was like, yeah, it's best that you don't say anything.
Wow.
Right? So that's a personal anecdote about how black men are made not only into objects, but how we're made for other people's disposal. A lot of the work that I do is on the sexual abuse and rape of black men throughout history and in our society. And no matter how much data or how many stories I accumulate, people do not want to accept that young black men are being sexually coerced and raped in America. And you know, even before the interview, the reason I sent you the government statistics was because I know that in the back of people's mind, there's this doubt that I don't know how many articles I published on this now, but there's this denial that black men are being victims of rape largely by women.
Yeah.
And you get these experiences where black boys are between the ages of 6 and 9, right? 9 and 12, reporting that their first sexual experience are with older teenage or girls or women. We go and study we get snapshots of their experience, and what do we find? Young boys saying that older women were their first sexual experience, raped them, coerced them, taught them about sex, ridiculed them if they refused. You see the numbers, you see the CDC data sets, and yet, despite the stories and everything, nobody can accept that black men have to deal with this. I'm in a discipline where a black feminist literally told me that it's impossible for black boys or black men to be raped because they always want sex.
Wow.
So the work that I do is very much about black men as victims because this is a part of our identity and our existence that not only is dismissed, right? Our humanity is dismissed, but it's willfully reconstructed as something different. People pretend that young black boys at the ages of 6 to 9 want to have sexual intercourse. And then if an older woman, a teenage girl or older woman actually has sex with them, it was because of their agency. It was because of the black boy seducing them. The black child seduced the teenage woman into raping him. So she has no culpability. And the effects that this has on young men is tremendous. Depression, anxiety, risky sexual behavior. A child before the age of 21, more likely to be a victim of intimate partner violence, more likely to be a perpetrator of intimate partner violence. There are some very serious pathways that explain a lot of the kinds of maladies and maladjustments that black men have in society that people refuse to look at because they refuse to acknowledge that black men can be victims to other groups of people, especially older black women in their community. If you want to tell a narrative about a black man raping a little boy, people will stand up and clap for you. I told you that's how they work. But you show that these young boys have issues with connectivity, compassion, and love because they were abused by people in their own families and communities who happen to be black women or girls, and nobody wants to have a conversation. And what my work is trying to capture is highlight that this is not take a feminist perspective. I'm not interested in punishing the perpetrator. I'm interested in getting the victims help. We need to identify the perpetrators, but my work doesn't come from a criminological orientation. These young men are growing up with lack of hopelessness and not being able to effectively cope with trauma. And what my work's trying to do is show people that the issue of racism is about much more than just bullets. So if you want to talk about intersectionality and make it political, God bless you. But you notice that black men are never depicted as victims in intersectionality. They're always depicted as perpetrators. So when someone comes in from a black male studies orientation and says, well, let's just take a look at, I don't know, domestic abuse. Why do so many black men and boys report high incidences of child physical abuse by their mothers? Why are so many black men and boys talking about early statutory rape and sexual coercion? Why are so many black men and boys talked about verbal, psychological, and physical abuse by their spouses? Oh, well, you know, Tommy, you can't study that. Right? We have a real problem dealing with facts when it comes to black men. And the effect of that is that we're attributing a certain kind of malice and the notion of toxic masculinity to their behaviors when their behaviors match up with any other group of victims from the same socioeconomic status and with the same backgrounds of trauma and abuse. But we refuse to acknowledge that there's not something fundamentally wrong with them. And this is the dominant orientation that we find in philosophy. You can't go to a philosophy conference where you don't hear a conversation about black men being toxic or angry. And then when you question that idea, because remember, you can't question it. You're just the person they're talking about. You can't question people talking about your own group. But when you do challenge it, that's evidence of your toxic masculinity. So all they have to do is cite, gesture towards Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, and suddenly the world is right. Absolutely, we know this is how black men are. When you start talking to actual victims, you have clinical and hands-on experience. You're dealing with public policy considerations and epidemiology. Well, that can't be allowed because, you know, we don't like evidence that contradicts our ideology and philosophy. We have a real problem. It's based on sexual violence and sexual abuse.
I am going to still, I'm gonna come back to the question that I asked John to you, Tommy, again, it's pushing again on why is this? Why is it that society can't see this, right? What is keeping the blinders on, right? Why can't, what is in the way for people, for people to be able to actually see how black men are being treated in society? What's actually getting in the way? John, you already answered. So, Tommy, I'm asking you now.
I mean, well, look, society hates black men. So this is what black male studies scholars call anti-black misandry. Anti-black misandry is the collective negative ideas that a society or a group have about black men that justify the sanction or elimination of that group. Now, we know from various social psychology studies, both formidability studies and even studies going back as far as preschool, that when you put groups of black men or boys together, they have the most negative aspects of stereotypes just by looking at them. We know that from Colin Book's work that just hearing a black man's name activates coping fight or flight mechanisms, and they consider them as being larger, stronger, faster, and a more lethal threat than other ethnicities. So we can't deny this. We know that in employment situations, even when employers hold negative stereotypes about black women being angry, loud, and aggressive, when you compare them to black men, those stereotypes become positive, right? Because ideas that they're angry, aggressive, and independent because they have to deal with black men who are criminal and more lethal, right? So we know that there's an interaction factor or variable in how we actually understand what's going on in society and their hatred towards black men. The problem is that our society and academic life is largely structured around white narratives and mythologies of existence. So if white people say that black men are dangerous, despite the fact that black men's danger is no higher when you control for class than practically any other group, it's the concentration of these men in certain kind of environments and in certain kind of demographics like unemployment, trauma, early exposure to violence, etc. So even when you control for the factors that people say we need to for good scientific or social scientific understanding, black men somehow get pathologized even beyond that. So the reason that society doesn't recognize us that way is because they construct us as animals, specifically apes, if you follow the work of Philip Adabo-Goff, and they have an investment in our death and dying. And what's been most disappointing about how people want to deal with this reality is they keep positing that black men, because they're men, are somehow not vulnerable to these kinds of social mythologies. This is part of the problem of making black men generic subjects. And by generic subjects, I mean that we only define black male experience through race. In every single quarter, make it be it economic, education, social perception, political constituency, stereotypes about racial stereotypes, about who's the most dangerous or most promiscuous. All these focus on black men. Like every single model shows that racial stereotypes are overwhelmingly predicated on how outgroups like whites view black men to stand in for the negativity of the race. They think they're the biggest problem. So it's no surprise then that the conversation we're having is not on people's radars, because you think that everything negative about black people are actually how black men of the race are. which is why you could explain black girl magic so easily. Because, hey, they're not like black men. And this is exactly the kind of argument that you get coming out of the 1960s and 70s when white feminists and black feminists are starting to talk about black men as a unique subculture within the black community. It's black men who are dangerous. It's black men who don't want to work. It's black men who are uneducated. It's black men who are rapists. It's black men who are abusers. You know, this is the narrative. So it allows educated, socially mobile black women, especially in the academy, to distance themselves from black men. This is the exact same argument Sylvia Wynter makes in No Humans Evolve. This is the exact same argument that Elaine Brown makes in The Condemnation of Little B. So we have to be very deliberate and very disciplined in what the actual criticism is. People don't see this because they've constructed an epistemology and an order of knowledge and a social psychology that does not view black men as victims. And the reason that you have the work of people like Ashby Plant that shows that even college-educated students, they will shoot an unarmed black man before they shoot armed black women and white women is because there's such a social negativity and negation of black male life that even an unarmed black man who does not have a gun is thought to be a more lethal danger than armed women, be they black or white, right? And we have to deal with that, right? We have to deal with that. We can't keep pretending that it's ignorance. We have to understand that these products and these notions about black men are made to justify social hierarchies and inevitably justify the kinds of knowledge and programs that are being put into the academy. Because you have to remember that the theories that we're talking about, the theories that ultimately undergird the belly of intersectionality's feminist theorization, all come from racist white academics. These are not the wild, crazy white people of the 60s and 70s. These are criminologists, right? These are people who have degrees in sociology. Right? These are people who, some of which are still alive, working in sociology departments, like Holmes and Williams, authors of The Second Assault. So we have to understand what is being put out, why certain things aren't being questioned, and then why people are so offended that those things are now being challenged with evidence and fact.
Tommy,
All right, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, John.
Tommy,
Go ahead,
I was the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was an interesting election to me. And I will acknowledge to all of you all, I didn't vote. Because for me, I didn't see anyone in the race that represented me or that I could get behind. And I believe in the sacredness of the vote. One thing I felt like I noticed when I was watching Hillary Clinton in particular, who Michelle Obama has said is Black people's fault that Donald Trump won, that Hillary Clinton didn't lose, that if we had gotten out and voted, that you know, she would have won. And we do know that Black women voted heavily for Hillary Clinton. That was her biggest support group. Black men wasn't as strong that way. And I noticed when I was watching Hillary Clinton speak, she never spoke to Black men. She spoke about Black men. She would talk to all these audiences of Black women, and she would talk to Black women, but she never talked to Black men. She talked about Black men. And what I thought, and I was really interested in what your take on this was, I felt like she was of the mind that Black women would come home, tell Black men what to do, and we would just do it, so she didn't have to talk to Black men. We were subjected to Black women's orders, Black women's dictates. What are your thoughts about that?
I think, well, there's a few things. One, the political science research after the election shows that there wasn't a significant gender gap. So I know a lot of the narrative follows that CNN poll, 13% of Black men, but when they looked at larger samples, they didn't find any significant gender gap. So that's kind of the first thing. Because, the CNN poll only has a 90-person spread, because they only interview like 2,000 or some Black people. But I think at a larger point, though, is that Black men were being interpreted as if any disagreement with Black women's vote was in fact a pathological issue. That Black men, for example, couldn't say, well, look, we don't want Donald Trump, but we don't want Hillary Clinton, so they stayed home, right? They didn't exercise the vote. Well, that's because they're sexist and patriarchal, right? And it's not because they have an issue with her involvement of targeting Black men as super predators in the mid-90s. The issue is their sexism and misogyny. And for the Black men who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, there could not possibly be an issue-based analysis that says, well, look, maybe I'm tired of being on the plantation of Democratic politics. let's try out this Trump guy. I disagree with him, right? But maybe he has something better than putting all the black people in jail. Now, that's not my rationalization, but if there are black men who are moderate/right, that certainly could be their rationalization. But black men are not studied with that kind of nuance and depth, right? One of the first things we learned in political science class back in the long time ago in the 90s was that you have people who are base voters that vote for one party no matter what. You have people who are issue-based voters, right? And this may have been a situation where black men were issue-based voters. The problem on both fronts, though, is why do black men have to line up with black women's political posture? That's the question I'm asking. Nobody's giving me a justification for that. Everything that we hear today about black women voting for the liberation of the rest of the country comes on the assertion and the assumption that voting Democratic is best for the future of the country. Nobody substantiated that claim. It's just the claim that because they vote Democratic more in many elections, locally, et cetera, that means that they have the best interests of the country at heart. That's a ridiculous premise. Voting for a political party does not mean that you have the best interests of a whole group of people in your interest. And I think that that's what's also being reproduced in the academy, where intersectionality becomes this kind of marker for democratic or left liberal platform politics. So it's not an analysis, it's just saying, well, given the white supremacy of the Republicans and the white supremacy of the Democrats, let's castigate black men for not buying into the progressive narrative, even though they're disenfranchised, even though they're more unemployed, even though they have one of the lowest wages at 51 cents. When you take into consideration unemployment and incarceration, they basically are at the same levels that they had pre-segregation. None of that matters. The issue is, do they perform a certain kind of political need that white liberals have? And if they don't, then we get to continue this narrative of deficit, of lack, and of negativity, right? So I think Hillary's telling, but what I think is more telling is how white liberals and black feminists use that moment. Because you can look, because everything comes off that CNN poll, right? You can look at the CNN poll and just break it down. The sample's not large enough to tell you anything. And when you get down to a 90-person difference, why does that become the totality of black men's political persona and personality? Right? And this is what I mean. That's no other group is defined in that way. No other group. So when we look at educated whites that voted for Trump, there's all kind of reasons, all kind of fears, all kind of nuances, property tax, backlash, future, security, etc. But black men, well, we don't really have any studies on black men's voting behavior. Either they vote with black women or they're sexist and misogynist. Right? And this speaks to the lack of depth that we actually have, because most of the things that we learned about black men are mythological. They have no basis in any fact. You can't question them or study them. It's just a mythology that we tell ourselves about how they act. So that's what I think Hillary Clinton very much is. And now you see the same thing being rehearsed with Kamala Harris, because black men are, why should I trust the cop? Black men grow up in fear, right? From black boys forward, we grow up in fear of cops. And you telling me that I got to give my vote to a black woman that supports locking black people up, not just black men, but other black women. And because black men, a certain group of black men or a sect of black men are politically skeptical about that, suddenly that becomes evidence of patriarchy or evidence of sexism. It's the go-to strategy. It's the same thing that Phoebe Cousins said back in the 1860s, right? Black men are getting a taste of freedom. They're more brutish. They're more barbaric than even white men, so they should be denied. And we continue to read black men in that way today. There's nothing deep about it. Again, this is part of the problem we have of not being able to genuinely confront and deal with the images and the ideologies that other people have about us or our group.
Right. In an academy which has supposedly been significantly influenced by empiricism for centuries now, yet still, as you've said over and over, don't want to hear the lived experience of black men talking about black men and don't want to see the data about black men. So their own projects get undermined here even. That's how rampant this black misandry is.
And to be honest with you, most of the theories that are based in empiricism, so if you go back and read subcultural violence theory or the second assault, that's talking about race, sex stratification in the 1980s, they flat out say, we have no empirical evidence that black men are compensatory. There's no evidence, right? So if you actually go back and do what scholars used to do, like literature reviews, you would find out that most of the theories that we claim are empirically substantiated were the starting assumptions that people had about black men as a group because of the disproportionate rates of homicide and sexual assault and rape in their community. And now that the definition of rape has changed And you see similar rates of rape, not only amongst Black women against Black men, but also of white women against white men. Nobody wants to go back and start questioning, well, maybe we got some things about gender wrong. So what they do, this evidence has been around since for a decade. So we just pretend that it doesn't exist, right? Laura Stempel writes about this several years ago. She's a professor at UCLA about equal rates of sexual assault in the CDC NISVS data set. Nobody acknowledges it. Everybody's quiet about it. But part of the argument about this isn't just acknowledging that women are perpetrators of rape. It's to pull apart the idea that Black men especially have an innate cultural sensibility and deficit that motivates them towards rape. If you have similar rates of perpetration, then what is it that makes Black men uniquely evil? If you have a decade worth of evidence that says that these things are varied by context and by histories and trauma, why are Black men still being constructed as the boogeyman? And more importantly, whose departments and whose careers are being built are propagating things that we know empirically are false? Right? This argument about Black men goes so much deeper than an opinion. There's tons of receipts, both in our field of philosophy and the academy at large, that deliberately are utilizing criminological studies and bogus scholarship to influence criminal justice policy and political rhetoric about Black men and the place they should stay in. Lynn A. Curtis didn't just pop up into Washington, D.C. He wrote things that influence criminal policy. And these white feminists in the 1970s utilized this as a way to justify how Black women would be treated in the criminal justice system. And this isn't just about the war on drugs. This is about rape policy. This is about economic policy and anti-discrimination law. So we have a lot of work to do if we're trying to actually get at the crux of what's happening to Black men and boys in this country. And people want to keep making this about politics and identity when I'm talking about groups of death and dying, right? There's a fundamental readjustment that has to be had in the academy and in our political sphere to get at the humanity of what these men are suffering.
Yeah, but who would benefit from Black men's humanity? Who would benefit? What group other than Black men would benefit from our upliftment?
You're absolutely right.
But I mean, what's amazing there is that the sociological and epidemiological studies show that even white folks would benefit from this. White folks benefit from more equal societies as much as we like to claim that we don't. White folks benefit from more integrated, more diverse classrooms, even though we like to pretend we don't. So I mean, it seems so toxic to me that we white folks are even willing to undermine ourselves to continue to undermine Black men.
But see, that's a very white experience. I don't know any group that undermines themselves the way white people do, especially poor white people. I don't know any group that votes against their own interests the way white people will vote against their own interests. So that's actually quite frankly a white thing to do, especially where race is concerned. I have seen white people do some very damning things to themselves in the interest of furthering racism. You know, so I mean, there is something to be studied there with white people. Like, well, I mean, how often are white people complicit in their own demise? How much, and how much of that is as a result of their own racism?
So we've talked a lot. We've gone all over the place, and I've really appreciated this. I've got so many notes. I've got literally 10 pages of notes in front of me right now, starting with all the way back up, and I'm going to start back with the death threats and attempting to accept fear, to trauma porn, to having to hide Black maleness, being the most humane, and oftentimes, right, this was something I was thinking about in the process, is being considered a devil. And usually when you're considered at the bottom, you have no choice, you have no option but to be the most open to everything that's above you, right? And so there's this idea that Black men might also be the most humane, the most open, the most this, the most that, in relationship to having to be defined in relationship to other people's morals, right? By putting the black male as this devil or as this demon, and then allowing the rest of society to put their morality in relationship to that, right? And then we move forward, and we talked about the society being anti-black, male especially, the super predator, that the narrative, that part of the reason why society is anti-black, and that we see this negative effect, and this man not is because the narrative is being controlled by whiteness in the same ways, that if we want to talk about sex, that's being controlled by whiteness, and why we've had to have the womanist movement, right? We've also talked about intersectionality in the ways that, to some extent, it doesn't have the apparatus to deal with the man now. It doesn't have the apparatus to deal with black men. And so then we need to do something. Intersectionality either needs to grow, it seems to be the case, at least from what Tommy wants to say, or we've got to get rid of the concept. You know, as James, I'm going to go to James Baldwin here and go to the title of our podcast. The concept of God either has to be larger, freer, and more loving. And if it's not, then it's time that we got rid of the concept, right? And I think that Tommy would want to say the same thing about intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality has to be larger, freer, and more loving in relationship to all points of intersection. And even if those points of intersection don't line up in the ways that intersectionality wants it to be, then it either has to, like, if it doesn't line up and we don't change it, then we have to get rid of the concept, right? Am I characterizing you well enough there, Tommy?
Absolutely. If I could just say something very briefly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You know, intersectionality is, you know, nobody. I'll put it this way: nobody is opposed to the various and voluminous studies that Black women have done about their own experience. I honestly don't know a Black man in the academy that's like, I'm tired of hearing about Black women. That's not the argument. The argument is the caricatures that Black men become constructed as in an effort for some projects in Black feminist theory to go forward. So it's one thing to say, look, we need to pay attention to Black women in the civil rights movement, to their political activism. Everybody I know, in my experience, is down for that project. What the people that I'm talking to are not down for is this idea that Black men, because their men are rapists, because their men are abusers, because are trying to fulfill some lost function of patriarchy, that because we're talking about the issues that we have now about being disempowered by racism, that our only coping mechanism is to try to imitate white men, right? Like these are the kinds of analyses that are running rampant under Black feminist and intersectional theory that to this day have not yet been proven. And it is simply not enough for Black men to be characterized by the negative experiences that white women or Black women have with them as academic truth and theory. So what I'm saying is, if intersectionality is making a prediction that Black women are always on the bottom, or that Black men are simply trying to emulate white masculinity, and it refuses the empirical data for the last 30 years to show otherwise, then the concept was not meant as an analytic concept, but an axiom that's trying to work under the guise of a theoretical tool. If it cannot change on the basis of evidence and accept falsification, then there's no reason that Black men should embrace a theory that entails them accepting their own deficit and pathology as the basis for trying to diversify or pluralize subjectivity. Okay. And what I'm suggesting is that Black male studies intervenes differently. Does it test an intersection? If you frame it as that, absolutely. I prefer an entity-based model, but you conceptualize it different ways. The major difference is that Black male studies articulates Black male experience through ethnography, empiricism, and actual statements of fact. And it's the materiality of Black men's lives and their relationship to other specific groups that becomes the way of not only reclaiming Black male humanity, but testing the types of malices and maladjustments that they engage on because they lose that humanity. And if that's not a rigorous intellectual, theoretical, and scientific approach, then I don't know how the hell we're going to study gender. But what's being refused here is not the actual study of Black men in earnest. What's being refused here is that a Black man stood up in America and said that everyone, including Black feminists and Black feminist theory, was wrong about Black men. That's what's being contested. Not the evidence, not the facts, not the reality or even the connection that Black men feel with Black male studies, but rather that in an academic and bourgeois space that Black men do not have, should not dare to have the right to speak about themselves and say something different than other people have said. And that's what I think intersectionality tries to operate as the guise. It gives legitimacy about negative stereotypes about Black men without having to actually engage Black men or try to test what Black men are actually thought to be.
Okay, that is very clear now. It's very clear now.
I hope
very
none
clear
of
now.
that last statement.
Yeah.
I hope y'all don't edit none of that last statement.
No, we won't. We won't. Leaving the whole thing.
Yeah.
So if we are now looking at what's actually happening to Black men, right? That's the focus here. Is that intersectionality to some extent is not actually looking at Black men. It's not actually looking at the evidence. Not actually looking at the facts, right? And this is where I'm going to ask a kind of different question. How do we cultivate Black boy joy in black men and boys if their experience is not being seen? How do we actually cultivate Black joy in men and boys then, right? How do we then, when Black men and boys are being demonized and then not being affirmed by the fact that this actually exists in their experience, right? Or that they're actually being seen this way. How then do we like combat that as Black men and boys? Have each other? What do we do? Because I have, I'm a black boy, Black man, and it's very, we know this in the academy, it's very isolating, right? So how do we not only cultivate, and I would say cultivate each other, but also cultivate ourselves even in the isolation, right? Because there has to be some way that we can build each other up or build ourselves up at least, right? I just am I want at least to end on something where it's I walk out of this and I've seen a lot of my experience in this, but I'm trying to walk out where I'm now, I've walked down into the valley and I've saw myself dead, right? And now I'm trying to resurrect, I've had that existential, it's in my face, and now I'm trying to walk on. And I know this is something that also is foundational to the Black male experience, right? The ability to walk on. That I want to walk on in a way that actually is cultivating, and this is the big thing, Black boy and Black male joy, right? Not persistence, right? Because I think that's how I have been doing it over the past, right? Yeah. If I've just been persisting, I'm you know what, this is just what has to be done. And you guys talked about death, about my life not mattering until I die. And you don't know how young I was when I thought that. When that thought first came across my mind. And I don't know if it's been something that I've said for a long time, that if my life is more valuable gone than it is alive, then take it, right? If I'm gonna do more for my community dead than I would alive, then take this life, right? And so that's why when the cops pull me over and if they shoot me, it's you shot the wrong Black guy, right? My record's clean, I've done all this stuff. It's even though they're gonna try some way to demonize me, it's gonna be hard, right?
But you're the right guy. I don't understand why you say you're not the right. You are the right guy for them to shoot if you have no criminal past.
100%. But what I'm saying is, if the weight of my death if it would do more now than it would do in 30 years, right? Then I've, in the past anyways, in my life, I've been I'm willing to give it up, right? And so what I'm trying to do is really talk about ways where I can walk away from having to subsist, to stay, right, to get out of what David Marriott talks about, the crawl space, right? I want to get out of the valley, right? I want to stop. I don't want to be how do I step out of the valley? And the thing is, I think it's hard to talk about stepping out of the valley because we're in the valley, we're all there together. right? No one's further, I don't know if anyone's further out of the valley. It's like getting out of the valley is all of, like, we're all like climbing this thing, muddy, slipping up and down. And so I'm just trying to like get some type of joy at the end. Like I want some type of, yeah. So maybe I'll go, and maybe this will make it clearer, the question. It makes me think about someone like the difference between X and king, right? X really, you don't have a king without an X, right? X, the one thing that he focuses on is Black people loving Blackness, right? And so part of it is that I think this is something that's like missing in relationship to the black male experience. We really, people look at us and it looks like we really love ourselves, right? It really, like, we're like, oh, we've got all the style, we've got all the this, we don't care about this, you know, we're like this and that. But I think in that there's a lot of hate. There's a whole bunch of hate. And so I'm trying to like push against that hate towards some type of joy, some type of theme that's Black men loving Black men, right? And I think that's something that I like, yeah, I've to some extent struggled seeing. And so I'm just like, what are ways that we can cultivate this love for each other, at least, and love for ourselves? How can I love myself better? How can I love other Black men better? How can I love other Black boys better? And not in a way that's telling them to not be a Black male, right? I think that's oftentimes what it is. I don't know, and I feel bad about this. I'm throwing myself under the bus here. But in the past, I know there's been times where I've had a Black male student and I'm like, hey, like, oh, you want to do that? Well, then, you know, like, I've done the same thing that's been done to me, where it's like, I'm going to ask you not to give up all that you're wearing, but maybe a little bit, right? Just your pants a little less baggy, right? Even though your mind is as sharp as mine, right? And so what are ways, I guess, that I'm trying to say that we can cultivate Black boy joy or love for being a Black male to other Black males? I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. John or Tommy, maybe the question still isn't well formed.
I understand what you're saying.
I don't know how. You know, and maybe Tommy, you might say, you know, this text is one of the ways.
Do you mind if I take a little bit, John? No, listen. I think let me tell you. I'll tell you a really brief story. When I did my PhD in Southern Illinois, I was coming back from DePaul University. DePaul University started a critical race studies program back in the day, and they did not like me whatsoever. Okay? So they said things like, oh, you can't write. We don't think you're philosophically sharp, X, Y, and Z. So I left the program. Entered Southern Illinois because at that point I was tired of philosophy. Said I was going to go to law school. My advisor, Ken Sticker, said, hey, you know, why don't you just apply to the program, you know, help me out with a few classes, etc. And then he said, well, you know, you'll probably only be here like a year or so. And I was like, well, can somebody finish a PhD in a year? He's like, well, no, nobody's ever done it. So I was like, I think I could do it. So I finished my PhD in a year, finished all my coursework. And I'm not saying that as a story of triumph. Actually, I'm trying to say the opposite. My joy came about because white people in general hate Black men. They don't want us around. They don't want to engage us. They don't recognize our genius, our brilliance, or any potential. So my strategy has always been to defy everything that white society imposes on me. Right? White people were hoping that when I was attacked by the alt-right, and probably a lot of Black people in philosophy too, were hoping that my career was going to be over. So I sat down in my room and thought about it, right? How's a way to continue a career doing what I'm going to do? The paradigm about what we think about ourselves has to shift, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
can't be that we're loved and accepted like other groups of people. That's not going to happen.
Okay.
Right? I remember I used to talk to Derek Bell about this all the time before he passed over email. And he was like, yeah, people hate me. People act like I'm not intelligent, people X, Y, and Z. But he found a different way to build value. And that's what Black men and boys have to do. The idea that we're going to be accepted is not going to work. So we have to have different strategies by which we actually form community. And I think you can tell you from your own experience that that's exactly how Black male studies scholars move through the academy, right? It's no mistake that Black men are being exposed to the man not. It's no mistake that they're seeking it out themselves. I've had people email me saying, well, my teacher told me I couldn't read this book, so I went out and bought it and read it, right? Like they're like Black men form, and I'm being dead serious with you. Black men are forming their own reading groups because people in the academy are telling them not to read this book. So Black men have to reconstruct the idea of what their existence means, not just to other people, but for themselves. Like this is going to be a fight. And I think you can tell that the reaction that people have had just to me telling the truth about Black men is a fight. And the funny thing is that when you read the book, nobody's being attacked. It's a bunch of statistics, facts, and theories about what that means. But people want to pick a fight because the idea that Black men legitimate themselves, right, that value themselves is what's offensive. So the answer to your question is you have to think differently about what it is that you value. So the person that told you, well, listen, and this is what's important, right? And I mean this very seriously. I could have stayed at Texas A&M and just grinded away, said I'm fighting a good fight. But there's never been a Black person, much less a Black man, that said, I'm going to disregard everything that people say in philosophy and do what I'm going to do and still be better placed and more successful than 99% of all the philosophers in the country. That's never happened in history. There's never been a Black man that's accepted a chair position in Europe in an ancient university. Now, the point of that isn't to say that I'm great. The point of that is to say, well, think about how many young Black men think that could be them. Think about how many other Black men could say, well, you keep telling me that I have to do this, but Curry did that. Right? The issue is that it moves the needle about what Black people, but especially Black men, could be. And that's what Black men don't want to embrace. Black men don't want to be the sore thumb. We always talk about how we need role models, but we don't want to be the role model. And in this sense, the role model isn't playing the game. It's about defining what people can't say about us. So part of the question that you had about this young brother was like, well, I'm fearful for you because I know what people are going to say about
you. Yeah.
But ask yourself this question. They say that about you anyway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do every day.
This is a hard lesson I had to accept. No matter what I did. I've had a 4.0 since I was basically a kid. Right? I mean, on every single measure, I would be first generation, right? Parents didn't have college degree. If I was a white person, it'll be a lifetime special. Nobody cares about a Black boy from Lake Charles, Louisiana doing that. But it's a story for I know that I grew up in the South, so I know that no matter what I do, I am just a fancy talking Negro to white people generally. No matter how many degrees or book awards, right, or I get, this is just a Negro that speaks real well. I know that. So then why would I put my investment in what white people think? Why would I put my investment in groups of Black scholars in the academy that think I'm a rapist and an animal? See, if you do that, this is what Biko was saying. If you do that, you interiorize the inferiority that your oppressor is putting on you. And I'm not I don't like talking in like cliche. I'm just saying concretely, if you know these people are the enemies of your group and don't value your life, then why would you base how you feel about life on them? And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. But the strength of it comes from the fact that that there's other Black men that have said, look, we don't care what they say. If need be, I'll leave the country. You can have America. I'm going to go talk to people in France. I'm going to go talk to people in Switzerland. I'm going to Africa. Black men have options, and there are people around the world interested in our story. And that story isn't about demonizing any other group of Black people. I'm not trying to reclaim some mystic masculinity. I'm saying that Black male experience matters to how we understand racism, white supremacy, and the ongoing logics of genocide. And what makes us feel better about that is that there are places in the world where our story can be heard, where we matter because we're showing and disproving the same kind of arguments that Black people were disproving back in the turn of the 19th century. And that matters, right? But it means that you have to give up the faith that people are going to recognize you because you're the good Negro in the room. And that's what we've been taught to do. We've been taught to put on the suit, to stay quiet, to yes, sir. Yeah, Miss Ann, that's a real good point. You know, I'm sure look into standpoint epistemology. I know you don't know a thing about race or racism, but that was a really fine paper you gave there about feminism that I should probably incorporate because I'm a man in philosophy. I've seen it all, man. I've seen black men rush off to go get the dark liquor to deal with the stress of what it's like being in the company of all the white people in philosophy department. But the difference is that they're silent. I'm not. And you have to figure out the balance. Do you want to be a black man that white people say love and say, well, he's nice.
He sure is nice.
He sure is nice. I remember the first time that I got the first job I got, A&M. I was talking about the work of Charles Mills. And a colleague said, you know, he's a real nice guy. When we were talking about him potentially evaluating a file, oh, he published an article in ethics. White people like that. Never mind, this is a named professor at Northwestern.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to tell you is you can play the game. You can find validation, right? If you want to go for how they recognize you. But they're never going to recognize you until you're an old man that they don't feel is a threat. And then they'll give you stuff. Because when you got old, your hair, and they know that our lifespan is only going to 70, so they'll give you a chair when you're 60. Oh, we only got to deal with it for 5 or 6 years. But if you want to actually feel that validation and fight that feeling you have, it's going to require you to piss a lot of people off. Because what you're doing is you're rejecting what they told you that you are. And a lot of black men are scared of that. I talk to black men in philosophy and academy all the time, where they're scared of having to feel like the only value they have in the world is them dying. That the only way that good things are going to be said about them is when they're no longer here. That they're a symbol for somebody else's movement. And if you're never going to be loved by the world, then burn the world down. This is why they value white people. This is why they value white feminists. This is why they value BLM. But you're the corpse that they're building the protest off of. So it comes a realization, right? And this is what I talk about in the book is eschatological dilemmas. The reclamation of black male identity comes in the realization that we have to expand our now. And that means that we have to infuse what we're doing and our suffering with new kinds of values. That means that you're going to have to be unliked by a whole lot of people. But I'd much rather be hated and remembered in history for being the first person to do something than to be somebody's damn boy. I come from Louisiana. That rings very differently for me.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I feel like you were speaking to me, but when you're speaking to me, you know, you're speaking to a lot of black boys. And no, I think it's a good. I appreciate it. I really do. I think a lot of people are afraid. A lot of people are scared, and being, you know, the black demon, the black devil that we are, you can't even say that you're afraid, right? It's the first thing I thought when you said talked about being about not being safe, about being afraid of standing up for black males. The first thing I thought is I was like, I can't say that. Like, no, I'm not afraid of that, right? And so these are the things where it's like even the ways that you were speaking really lends and focuses in on the black male experience. And I really appreciate your response to that question. I really do. We are gonna wrap it up because we've been recording for like an hour and a half now. We really appreciate the time that both of you have been willing to give. John and Tommy, thank you so much. This has been very informative, and we hope that others will see it the same way. Thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.